Your program doesn't say what this is because for a variety of reasons that I'll get to in a minute, but this is the business of no, security business of no. No, it's not over, but I want to start with thanks. This is the 6th year of SkyDogCon, and for the 6th year, I'm the first speaker. And in year 1, at my very, very, very first time speaking at a con, I was the very first speaker. And I almost crapped my pants, but thanks to Sky and the team and everybody else here, this has become a really amazing experience. I come back every year. It's been really easy the last 5 years when I lived in Louisville, but now I live in Los Angeles. So it was a little harder this year, but thank you. Thank you guys for coming out. I actually really love SkyDogCon. It's a really sort of eclectic, cool thing if you haven't been here before. How many people are first-timers? Awesome. Welcome to SkyDogCon. The first thing I'll tell you is avoid that man, especially if he has one of these in his hands because they taste horrible. But that's just part of the... Oh, son of a... God. I hate you.
It's funny, I didn't get the video going, but I got funny Smirnoff Ice. Come on, don't show. Hey, priorities. All right.
All right, this talk's going to get really interesting now. Thanks. I love you, too. Like I said, how we got here 6 years ago is I walked up to Sky at DerbyCon and somebody introduced me, and Sky literally went, "You should give a talk." And I went, "What the fuck?" But that sort of turned into this. And if you know me very well, no, my slides aren't done yet. I'm like the biggest procrastinator on planet Earth. And literally until like 4 weeks ago, I didn't even know if I was going to be here because I just moved to California 7 weeks ago. Part of that is if you've never given a talk, there's this pervasive fear of this guy icing you and forgetting what you want to say. But I will encourage you, if you have an idea, write it down, give a talk. SkyDogCon is a great place to do that. So the question becomes, how did we get here? Well, I've been in security for about 15 years. And I started noticing recently that there was sort of a common conversation that happened all the time. So we go to cons and we give talks and then we drink. Yeah, and then we drink some more. And then we probably drink some more. And then we probably drink even more after that, and then there's talks the next day. But in between all of that, there seems to be this common conversation. And that common conversation is how hard we work, and security is difficult. Oh my God, it's hard, and maybe that's part of the reason we drink so much. And how we protect whatever company it is we're working for, and how we build great stuff, but how the users constantly screw it up. The users, just don't give a flying crap about what we do. And we have this very different perception of ourselves. Often we think of our jobs as a very specific sort of idea, and I'm going to elaborate on that in a minute, but I want to talk about this perception of who we think we are. We sort of view ourselves as sophisticated and knowledgeable, and maybe just benevolently evil. If you don't recognize that guy, that's Dr. No. So sort of benevolently evil, when in some reality of the audience, it's more like Dr. Evil. We may appear as somewhat strange and incompetent, depending on, again, the audience. And often we're viewed as saying this quite often to users. In many places, that is our business. We're in the business of telling users, no, they can't do something. Nope, you can't do that. That's dangerous. Nope, there's no encryption on that. Nope, you can't have that piece of software. It doesn't do blah. Or I don't trust this or that or that. And that's a lot of what we are. When, what we're trying to tell people is, hello, I'm the expert and I know what I'm doing. But people don't listen to us and they continue to compromise security for some crazy reason. If only they would listen to us. There is the idea of possibly 3 outcomes in this, in my opinion. Is this an archetypal story? Is this just a story we tell so we can drink? Maybe. It's possible. Is the world really this way? Or is it the third thing, which I think is more likely, and that's that there's an indication and a flaw in the way that we think about security and the way we actually practice it? Whether that's information security or network security, doesn't matter. quite often our goals as security practitioners, we have a clear idea of where we think we're supposed to be, what the goal is. But that's not the idea that the business has. The business has a very different idea of what the goal looks like and where it is and how large it is. We think we're out there to secure all the things, when in reality we have, the Smirnoff Ice is doing its job. That was nice. A little burp there. We think we're going to secure all the things, and as I've already mentioned, we're probably drinking all the booze and hacking all the things, because that's sort of what we think we're supposed to do and why we come to cons. And then again, often, how about a tall glass if I just don't care? That's what it often comes off to as users, that we don't care about what their problem is. We don't care about what they're trying to accomplish. We care about some other security goal that doesn't necessarily align, and that leads to a very different viewpoint of who we are and what we think we do versus what other people think. I think this is a really cool meme because it sort of illustrates the point that different viewpoints of the same thing have very different outcomes. So I happened to come across a really cool TED Talk by a guy named Dan Ariely. And Dan did a couple of experiments with people that were really kind of interesting. And the first one was with these Lego Bionicles. So he was trying to figure out things about differential work. And I'm going to tell the story and then I'll try to connect the two pieces. And in his experiment, his first experiment, what he did is he had people come in and he put a Bionicle on the table and he said, would you like to build this Bionicle for $3? And if they said yes, they'd hand them the Bionicle and they'd build it. And then they'd take it away and they'd put it under the table and they said, would you like to build another one for $2.70? They said yes, they'd give them another one. And they would keep doing that. How about $2.10? How about $1? And going down until they quit making Bionicles. In another group, they did a slightly different experiment. And in that experiment, what they did is what they call the Sisyphean version. Thanks, Smirnoff Ice. And what they did in that version is they'd give them the Bionicle and say, would you like to build this Bionicle for $3? If they said yes, they'd build it. And then they said, would you like to build another one? If they said yes, they'd take the first one, put it in front of them, and while they were building the second one, they would disassemble the first one in front of them. And then they would say, would you like to build another one? And if they said yes, they'd give them the first one. And they would continue this cycle of doing the Bionicles until they gave up. How many of you all think that the first group built more Bionicles than the second group? You'd be right. How much more do you think they built that was different? How many? 5? Pretty close. They built 11 more. They would do it 11 times more than the Sisyphean version. And the second version was actually thought up by a grad student, so maybe the grad student's a little messed up. But it's an interesting interplay, and what it tells us is that the value of work that is done, to some degree, is tied to how we value it and then what other people do with it. Okay. So that led into thinking about Ikea Furniture. Like, it's not the prettiest stuff in the world, and sometimes it's really hard to build. But if you actually finished it and you put that in your house, that furniture sort of has an attachment of, well, I did all this really, really hard work. This is actually pretty good furniture. And there's a value tied to it by the person that builds it. And that ties into another strange story of cake mix. You're going to love this. In the original cake mix, all you had to do was take the cake mix, put it in a bowl, add water, mix it, and bake it. That's it. People hated it. Women actually who made it, they were like, we don't like this. I didn't actually make the cake. They didn't have a feeling of making the cake. So do you know what Betty Crocker did to give them back the feeling of work? They took out the eggs and the milk. That's all they did. They took out the powdered eggs and powdered milk. So now you had to actually add eggs and milk and then cook it. That's it. But that made people feel like they'd done enough work that they could serve this cake to their friends and say, I made this cake, versus I poured it out of a box and mixed a bunch of water, I put it in the oven, and here's this cake. They tasted exactly the same. You can make these two cakes, and they taste no different at all. The only difference is the amount of work that someone puts into making it. So they decided to do another experiment. And the next experiment involved origami. Okay, so they brought people in, they said, well, we're going to have you make origami. And they had 3 groups. Group number 1 sort of got some instructions. Group number 2 got even less instructions, and group number 3 got no instructions. And they would make these origami. And then they would ask them, well, first they would tell them, they'd say, well, you actually made this origami for us. So we own it. But if you want it, we'll sell it back to you. How much do you think it's worth? And they would give prices for it. Well, they had a second group that observed, and all they would see is the end product. And they would ask them, hey, what do you think this origami is worth? And the team that made really ugly origami thought their origami was 5 times more valuable than the observers. So they gave them no instructions and they made really ugly origami, but they thought it was really high value. So there's this strange sort of connection between the amount of work that something gets put into and then its actual use, hence the Bionicle experiment, and or the amount of instructions that come out of it. And that sort of triggered an idea in my head around how this happens in security. We go off and we think we're solving these very difficult problems. And to us, they're very difficult. But they're so opaque to users that users don't really have any concept of how that connection is. And so they have a very different goal of what they're trying to accomplish. And that goes back to the early slide where I talked about security has a set of goals that often aren't aligned with what the business is trying to do. And that does lead to a slightly interesting problem. Anybody got a wiring closet like this? Yeah, I'm really sorry. And what this is supposed to illustrate is that what ends up happening is there is some layer of business, and then we build some security thing on top of it. And that doesn't quite solve the problem, so we build another security thing on top of that. And then we build another security thing on top of that. And another one on top of that. And now we have like 5 layers that nobody has any real clue of how they connect. And they're really, really complex. And now users want to throw their keyboard at you. Because all I want to do is send an email. And I got to plug in a USB key and a UB key and type this giant password and encrypted mail. And all I'm trying to do is wish my grandmother happy birthday. What the fuck? You know? There's this massive disconnect. And what ends up happening is this. Users don't care. You've essentially built the most beautiful wall in the world to a security practitioner, but to a user, they're like, this is just in my way. I'm going to go over it, I'm going to go around it, or I'm going to go through it. You've made a security speed bump. It's the equivalent of slow children playing. There should be a comma there, slow, comma, children playing, not slow children, just to be clear. And so you've got now a very interesting problem. How do we build realistic security that users will use? So this is, in my opinion, a huge problem. We are not thinking about this. And a reason for that is users don't often change defaults. Whatever you drop on their desk on the first day of work, 90% of them are going to keep. The 10% that change it work in IT. They know how the thing works. They're the ones that are going to root their Android phone. They're the ones that are going to install GPG and understand how it works and have a good key. The secretary doesn't care. All she wants to do is send email and make the schedules and make the meetings and schedule the food and whatever else has to get done. So what that tells us is that all of it is learned behavior. Everything that people do with computers is learned behavior. They're not natural. We're not born coming out of our mothers knowing how to keyboard and knowing how to be secure and knowing a bunch of other things. And that sort of got me thinking again about this problem. And as an example, passwords. Passwords are not natural. If I want to open a locked door, I pull my keys out of my pocket, I put the key in the door, and I turn the key, and the door opens, and I go through it. That physical connection to the security of it is a very easy thing for learned behavior to happen. Everybody who's ever unlocked a door can unlock any door. It's the simplest thing in the world. But making a secure password is harder than crap. That's why everyone adds a 1 to the end. Why? Because they can't remember it. Your brain's not wired for it. We've created this concept, oh, I'm going to have this great password security, 16 characters, you got to have an uppercase and a lowercase and a special character. Oh, wait, you can't have the number 5 because I have some legacy system that can't handle that. And now everyone's writing it on Post-it notes or putting it in their purse, or they've got a file on their desktop full of passwords. Or better yet, they've got a notebook full of them somewhere. Because the security doesn't match their concept. It doesn't match the world. To some degree, we could social engineer people into this. We have that skill set. This is one of the possible solutions is if I understand how people work and I understand what they are doing, then I can build security that social engineers them into the right answer. So perhaps we're asking the wrong questions. Maybe. When you go into a meeting and business says we're going to build blah, 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 and we need to be HIPAA compliant or SOX or GLPA or whatever the hell else they want, are you thinking about the business goal, or are you already digging into the technical problem that may not be necessarily connected to the original business goal? My guess is it's probably number two. We're all so busy in an engineering mindset of solving the problem that we're not really understanding the problem. And that leads to, you've got to, I hear buzzing. Okay, maybe it's just me. Okay. So if you haven't looked into, there's a really cool training class called Precision Questioning. I was lucky enough to get it at a previous employer. There's several books on it. Please go out and read it. The whole point here is how to ask the right question. If you're not used to the process, it can seem a little adversarial, but you can back it off. Because getting a precise answer to the wrong question doesn't help you. That's nice that I'm going to secure this with AES 256 and a giant, salt or whatever. But is that really what's needed at the end of it? Have you thought very seriously about the problem? You've got to ask the right questions in order to get the right answers. And these quotes are meant to help think about that. The other problem is straight human psychology. Anybody ever heard of Dunbar's number? No one's heard of Dunbar's number? Okay, we got one. Ben, of course, you've heard of Dunbar's number. So, I'll digress just a little bit. So this guy Dunbar starts studying human groups and why people feel uncomfortable in certain groups. And what he figures out is that there's sort of a social graph we can hold in our head, and it can't get bigger than 150 people. At about 150 people, it collapses. At about 150 people, I can maintain all the connections in my head of who is related to who and who might be friends with who and who's enemies with who and what job they do and what relationship they have, et cetera, et cetera. And so that I feel perfectly acceptable walking up to that person and talking to them or challenging them about a negative behavior. As soon as we cross that, we sort of get uncomfortable about saying to someone, hey, that's dangerous. You shouldn't do that. And that's where, people tailgating into buildings happens. That's where people allowing sort of negative behaviors happen. It's so effective that there are a couple of companies, I wish I could remember their name. I think it's Brookstone. It's in Connecticut. They have factories. No factory is bigger than 150 people. Not a single one. And every time the factory needs to grow above 150, they spawn a new factory and people move there and they start over again. They never get above 150. They have no they don't have employee handbooks. They don't have security manuals and things like that because each little group knows it well enough, and because they feel comfortable within the group, they socialize all that amongst themselves. Interesting idea. What if our work teams and buildings were no bigger than 150 people? Even if the company is bigger, if I have groups no bigger than 150 that can enforce the rules in a social context, I get the outcome I want, right? So, hey, why did you write a crappy password? Maybe that works. The other problem with that is you've got to be able to empathize with the user. My wife is really smart too and sort of a computer user, but often she tells me, knock it the fuck off, you know the answer, and they don't. We get into this concept of, I know the answer, therefore you must know the answer. You can never assume that anybody knows what you know. That's a very dangerous assumption, even if they're in the same field as you. It's quite often that you know something or you have learned something that is unique to your experience that you can then teach someone else. So if you can't empathize with the user and their problem and their business goal that they're trying to get to, you can't build a security solution that's going to mesh the two sides. Am I losing you guys? He left the room. Crap, he's going to ice me again. That means you're going to have real meetings with people. You can't assume through email. You're going to have to go dig through their business docs and understand the problems. You're going to have to get out of your comfortable little cubicle and walk down the hall and go do something with people. There's no magic easy button to making this happen. Okay, it's not going to be comfortable at first, and it's not going to be weird. I can tell you it will be successful. I built a really strange career of walking around the hallway. I worked at a healthcare company in Louisville for a long time, and I was known as the wanderer. I would literally stand up from my desk several times a day and just start walking the hallways and listening for conversations that were happening in open spaces that I could become involved with, and then just start talking to people. And often that led to understanding with the business. Say again?
Management by walking around.
Well, I wasn't a manager, but yeah, it was sort of management by walking around. And it's really interesting to hear, because most times people are going to discuss their problem or their issue with the person who sits in the cubicle next to them. There's a proximity thing that goes on. There's another research study that shows the people we work with most often excuse me, tend to sit within about 10 feet of us. You get out of that 10-foot circle, you tend not to talk with people. Think about it just for a minute. Think about the person you talk to most often at your office. They're probably in the cubicle next door or the office next door, right? They're not down the hall unless you've already got a relationship with them and you're trying to maintain that. They're right next to you. So often the teams that have problems and sit next together solve them together. So maybe think about rearranging yourself. Like I said, I just started a new job, and one of the things I do, I actually schedule 30-minute meetings with people from other parts of the company that are nowhere near me. Like, they'll just get a random meeting invite. Hey, let's have a coffee. I have learned more about my new company that way than I ever could have learned by reading business docs or reading Wall Street Journal articles on what we're supposed to be doing or anything else. The idea that I can just say, hey, let's have a conversation is honestly a business game changer. And if you're sitting in your little security bubble thinking, I'm going to build AES encryption, I'm going to have the most awesome key exchange in the world, does absolutely no good if no one's ever going to use it. Okay? So this is again, Curtis saying, go out into the world and take thy security knowledge and be awesome. Oh God, Brian's here. If you throw anything at me, I'm going to kill you. As a note, last year he had a little foamy thing that he passed out to like 40 people, and before I could even start talking, things came vaulting at me. Yeah, that's that kind of talk, hence Smirnoff Ice and throwy things. If you haven't figured out yet, SkyDogCon's pretty relaxed, and I like it that way, and I'm going to keep it that way. I tend to write about 20 or 30 minutes of slide stuff, because otherwise I think I'm getting really boring. And then I invite questions from the crowd, and you can throw things as long as they promise not to permanently injure me. So with that, I'm gonna leave it to a bunch of questions about asking you all, how do you think we can solve this problem so that security is what the business wants to do? So that security is the right thing to do? How do we make the security path easy, knowing that we have to overcome the behavior and the cognitive load that people already have about security and what they're trying to accomplish as a business? Yes, sir.
So how do you convince C-levels and in-betweens to get together? Is one of the larger, that was mentioned this morning in a conversation at breakfast. So the C-level folks were on board with the concept, but how do you get the mid-levels and everyone on the same page? Is it more important to get the higher-ups to buy in, because they'll downward direct stuff, or is it better to get an agreement lower down and work your way up?
So repeating the question for video and for anyone who couldn't hear him, it's what's more important, to get C-level buy-in and drive down, or get mid-level and drive up? And the answer is, in my opinion, is that depends on the culture. But that also depends on how you communicate. Keep in mind that when we communicate risk, we're communicating Sev A1 or high or whatever. That means absolutely jack crap to the CEO. If you look at the risk reports that come out of other parts of the company, they basically come and say, this is the likelihood of this happening, and here's how much it's going to actually cost us. Physical dollar values. Here's how often it's going to happen. So here's our yearly cost of this occurring. They actually have a dollar number where they can look at that and go, okay, I care enough about that because it's going to cost me money to go do it. If your risk reports don't say, hey, here's our risk of not patching this thing, it's going to cost us this much. And keep in mind, if you're telling them it's $1 million risk in an $18 billion company, they might go, They can afford that. And they totally are legitimate in making that decision. If we were to be able to build an entirely secure system, no one would ever use it. The reality is business is going to take risk because business is making money. That's what they want to do. There are very few businesses that are business of actual security. And in my opinion, the only pure one is the NSA. That's it. And they're obviously not very good at it. Much to my massive chagrin. Your business wants to do something, whether that's delivering healthcare or shipping widgets or whatever the hell it is, that's their business. So the risks to that are, do I not ship widgets? Do I not make widgets? Can I not deliver widgets? Whatever it is. If your security threat doesn't fit into stopping one of those things or impacting one of those things, they just don't care. They might care about their intellectual property. And honestly, I think that's a tough one because intellectual property is very difficult to get its hands on. So in some companies, to your point, you've got to convince the CEO or C-level and then drive down. In some companies, again, this depends on the culture, that's got to bubble up from the bottom. But in either direction, that's got to have a dollar value. If it doesn't have a dollar value, they don't know how to think about it. A CEO spends all day thinking about three things: shareholder value, company value, and actually having product leave whatever their product is. That's the three things they probably think about top level every day. If what you're doing doesn't fall into one of those structures, you're kind of screwed. You have a mismanagement thing. And often, I had a really great conversation with Robert Darwin last night. Hey, Robert. About this. And he brought up a really interesting point. I'm going to give him complete credit for it. Often, even in your security organization, the CISO and the CIO aren't aligned, which means the managers aren't aligned, which means the analysts aren't aligned. If you don't know what your goals are, what the hell are you doing? You're just pushing stuff around. You've got to know what the goals of each level above you are. And if you don't tie all the way up to the top, you're probably spinning your wheels. You're going to get really, really frustrated. You're going to have that situation where you build the most beautiful security widget on the face of the planet and nobody ever uses it. Or they go around, over, through, whatever it is. They don't care. Because they're trying to accomplish something else. So if your security goals aren't aligned with the business goals, or if they diverge at any point, anything that's a diversion is a lost cause. It's just that simple. And that's personal experience. I've had to sit in rooms and try to explain to CEOs in plain English why something was really bad. Like, oh my God, there's a 0 day. Like, what the hell's a 0 day? Oh, crap, I forgot. You don't speak my language. They don't. Unless you're in a security company, unless you're McAfee or whoever who actually speaks the security language, they have no clue what we're saying. You could speak Greek all day and they wouldn't know. They just don't know because it doesn't matter. Yeah.
I don't know if this falls into the category of absolutely, you have no hope regarding this, but I'd also like to ask you, what do you recommend for particularly in companies where there's been a culture for many years of people who are not software engineers, who are not security developers, they might be electrical engineers or chemical engineers or whatever, and they're the ones doing the programming for so long, you have to, do you recommend even trying to confront them, or do you recommend trying to go to the more top-down approach, trying to influence people? Because
Right.
just one brief example, one guy I work with, he's a device engineer from France, he has a PhD, and I keep explaining to him, some of the things that we do not making sense, like having databases that have foreign
Okay, so I'm going to repeat that. I'm going to try and repeat that to make sure I got it right. So how do you deal with people who end up writing code who don't have a traditional education or experience writing code, right? Anybody else got that? Come on, I know some of you've got to have companies where it's like you're the one IT guy and you do everything, or you end up writing code. Okay, so confronting people is generally the harder thing because you're already above 150. So people aren't going to be terribly accepting to that. In my experience, when I have to do that, it becomes better to say, how can I help you? If you can then buy into their problem and they feel you're buying into it, they're going to be much more open to accepting whatever it is you're going to say. And then you're teaching them a new skill.
Yeah, but I think in his point, he's saying that the guy thinks he doesn't have a problem, and him coming to him is a problem.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's a mix. I mean, I do see.
Okay.
I could make that argument and say, listen, I'll hear it, and then there are people here who I get the kind of, you don't have a PhD.
Okay, I'll try to address both. So again, for recording radio purposes, there's the problem of, I don't think I have a problem. So one, I actually dealt with this at a really, really large company. Literally, the architects were like, we don't have a security problem. Okay. So I built a training class. And basically, I built a specialized version of WebGoat, and I built a little 1-hour training, and I invited the architects to show up. And what I did is I made friends with one of the architects first, so I could convince him to come do this. And I showed him what I was doing. And I basically brought him in, and I said, well, here's a typical web app. And then I XSS'd it, and I SQLI'd it, and I SSRF'd it. I nailed all the top 10 and went, here's how this stuff works. And then I went, here's your website. Boop, and I popped one of them. And you could see his eyes get huge, like, this is a problem. Yeah, obviously, and I want to fix this problem. I want to be part of helping you guys find them and fix them before it ever happens. Because if I can give you a skill that makes your code better, obviously as engineers, we want to solve problems and fix stuff, we get better. So I did that by forming one relationship and then expanding that until eventually I gave this class to all the architects at that business. And then I gave it to all the senior level engineers. And then they had me flying around the country to hit all the engineers. And all I did was give a little couple-hour class on how to use Fiddler. I think we were using WebGoat, as the training part of it, and we were doing some other stuff. And they loved it because I didn't come in and tell them their baby was ugly. Oh, they really don't like that. Like, your crap sucks. Oh, nope, door's closed, shields up, I'm done. But if you show them on something else and then show them how that applies to what they're doing, that honestly got me a lot of cachet. And I would recommend that as one of the ways. This is why we have a problem. This is what I can do. When they realized that I can take a SQLi and turn it into admin and read the entire database, they flipped out. Like, oh my God. Because they cared enough about the business to understand that was a really bad thing. Yeah, we supply healthcare to hundreds of millions of people. Yeah, and I can steal it all. Awesome. So that's one way you open the door. The other way you open the door is you get involved in their problems. You might have to dig in. If you're a traditional software engineer and you have a software engineering background and they've got any sort of bug tracking database, fix a couple of bugs. And they'll see that you care enough about what they're doing to get involved in it as well, and then invite you in for whatever they're going to do next. And hopefully you can get involved in the design stage where you actually make more of a difference than, oh my God, we shipped this thing and now it's vulnerable. That's just an example of doing it in code. Train them, give them the skills. They've obviously fallen into it and maybe they like it. Train them up a little more. Like, hey, I'm going to give you a great skill. You don't want to stay here forever maybe. Maybe you want to go somewhere else. I'm going to give you a skill that you can market somewhere else. Grow your career. Have fun with it. Play games. Gamify stuff. Where I work now, we run little security challenges for people. Like, hey, if you can pick out the guy trying to fish you, or you can pick out the person trying to surf your badge into the building, you get a special award. You'd be surprised what people do for really crappy foam stuff. Like, oh my God, they'll bend over backwards for the ugliest foam crap in the world. It's really weird how the value of the object doesn't matter at all. It's really kind of funny that way. Human behavior is an awesome thing to mess with. And if you haven't listened to Chris Hadnagy, the human hacker, please, for the love of God, go listen to him. He's great. It's hilarious. And it applies to everything. I find myself social engineering CSR so I can get better seats on planes and all kinds of other things too. It has value in the real world beyond what we're trying to do security-wise. So you have to play that game with them, I think is the answer. It's not really up, down, left, right. When I build stuff, I tend to I follow a pattern of, I go horizontally first, like, hey, do my peers think this is okay? Then I go downwards to the people who are end up going to get this okay, and then I drive it upwards. Because by then I have the support of my peers, and I have the support of the people who are going to end up getting it, and they help me drive the next level up to say, oh, this must have value. It's not just my lone voice speaking. And that's a really good pattern. Whether you're program manager, which is what I do, or your traditional security type, having that cross of support helps drive things forward in whatever direction you need to go. Sometimes you got to go the other direction. Sometimes it's a cross up and then down because the people below are reticent. But if you think of that plus sign as you're building stuff, you can use that. But it's almost always starts with a cross. If your peers don't think it's any good, it's probably not going to go anywhere because your peers know as much about the problem space as you do. Good question. Thanks. I know it's really early. I hope you guys had your coffee and not Smirnoff Ice. Thank you. If there are no other questions, go forth and hack the badge. I'll be around the rest of the day. If you want to ask questions, I tend to hang out. We're getting close to 10 minutes for the next talk, so I want to make sure we can cycle people around. Have fun at SkyDogCon. Ask questions, break the badge, hack stuff. Have a great weekend. Thanks.